Namaste, Suswagatam, and welcome to our Sunday edition of Words of Wisdom Gyan Ganga on our Virat Hindustan Sangam social media channels. We are on our various social media channels and on podcast, and we thank our viewers across the globe. Today is episode number 166, and the topic is India headed for a war with China? And we have our patron president, Dr. Subramanian Swamy, and we have a guest today, Miss Cleo Paskal, who is based in North America. And I will give you a brief introduction about her. She has appeared on our program earlier. Cleo Paskal is a non-resident senior fellow for the Indo-Pacific at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Ms. Paskal specializes in strategic issues in the Indo-Pacific. She's a senior fellow at the USANA's Foundation. She's also a fellow at the Conference of Defense Associations Institute. She's a fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, a collaborator at the Network for Strategic Analysis, and on the International Board of Advisors of the Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies and the Global Counter-Terrorism Council. She was a visiting fellow at the Gateway House Indian Council for Global Relations in 2019. Apart from contributing to peer-reviewed academic books, she has contributed to numerous journals and newspapers. She is at presently the Sunday Guardian North America special correspondent. We welcome her to our show, and in the next 30 to 40 minutes, she along with Dr. Swamy will be discussing a very important subject: is India headed for a war with China? I have to thank my co-host, Professor Arvind Chaturvedi from Delhi, and Sri Ramesh Swamy for their support and hosting this Sunday program for the benefit of our viewers. I also wish to inform you that 2 Sundays ago, because last Sunday we had taken a break, 2 Sundays ago we had a discussion on the parliamentary system, constitution, and other issues, and we had a record viewership of 1,53,864 viewers from across the globe in nearly 120 countries. So we thank our viewers for their support. I also have to thank our technical team led by Ashish Shetty, Tejas Navalgul, Ishwar Iyer, Swaminathan, Rakesh Gadgi, Vishal Mehta, and Ajesh Nair for their background support to put this important program of Virat Hindustan Sangam every Sunday together. Thank you, and it is over to Dr. Subramanian Swamy to initiate this discussion on a very important topic which is of interest to all people in India and across the globe. Thank you. Over to Dr. Swamy.
Thank you very much, Jagdish. This is a very important topic, and I'm sure that's going to be a hot topic for at least many months, if not years, to come. We have a straightforward question that we have posed. Is India headed for war with China? Question is, why should we be heading for war? And the answer is quite simple, that if India has any self-respecting intentions to evict the Chinese who have occupied our territory. What kind of territory? Mutually agreed Indian territory. When was it mutually agreed? 1996, when many of us worked for improving relations with China. And I had in fact gone and had a one-to-one meeting with Deng Xiaoping, who then said that the thaw of the past, the tension of the past will go. I'm sending my a foreign minister to India to meet all your leaders and so on. So it slowly developed, it began developing, improving. And then there was this 18 one-to-one meeting with Mr. Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping. He came here, he dressed like an Indian, and he swung on the what we call as the jula, and even wore Tamil lungis and so on, all kinds of things. And we thought, this is all going great guns. But on April 18th, 2020, a officer of the External Affairs Ministry, a lady, she sent a note saying that I find that the Chinese have crossed the LAC. The LAC is mutually agreed line, and so they have crossed it, and they are moving towards Galwan, and they have already moved in a big way in a northern part called Depsang, and now they are to the southern part of Chushul, where there's a beautiful airport. I hope they don't grab it. So the first part is that they have crossed the mutually agreed line and occupied it and settled down there, built cantonments and so on and so forth. The surprising part is that the Indian Prime Minister and Indian government, they have yet not said that China is aggressed. They keep saying on the LAC, on the LAC. LAC must be, I mean, it's actually almost a pencil on the map, and I'm sure that even on the ground it couldn't be more than a few inches. Now, how can you say the army is stationed on the LAC? Either you're on before the LAC or after the LAC. But this kind of thing has been going on, but the government has not yet stated explicitly taking the name of China and saying that they are aggressors and they must clear out. Even in the discussions that are taking place, there are numerous, I don't know, I've lost count how many. All of them say, they use the word that we expressed our concern to China. I mean, they are sitting on your territory. How can you express concern? You should have been angry. You should have told them. At least you could have told them, get out. But even that has not been told. So what I'm finding is that if I compare to 2020 April 16th, when the lady officer sent a message for which she was actually chastised, the Chinese have been growing, crawling, and they're not only crawling in India, they're crawling in Bhutan. They're the Japanese, the Nepalese told me that they have also taken parts of Nepal. So there's no place in which they are in this whole subcontinent. They're moving. I don't count Pakistan because Pakistan is basically almost under their control. There may be some elements of the military which are not very keen on it, but across the board, China has a say. I don't even care for this Russians, because Russians, I consider them as junior partners of China, because they're so indebted to China that they cannot now do anything. So there is nowhere where the Russians have ever deviated from the Chinese. Chinese may deviate. They, for instance, on Ukraine, they have taken very little concern, and so that there's leaving it to the Russians to deal with it. So we are in a situation where the most strategic part of our country's territory, the Chinese have come. Chinese have to cross in Arunachal, they have to cross the mountains and come down. And I have reports that they have come down the hill quite a bit, and they could come to the plains of Assam at any time, as they proved in 1962. So all told today, the first point I would like to make is that the Chinese are in an aggressive mood. We do not know why. We thought we were friends, but it has shocked most of us by the way they have done it. And why is the Prime Minister of India not saying out loud that the Chinese have aggressed into our Indian territory? And if we are going to join the Quad, then why should we be still in the BRICS? Why should we in the SCO? and we can't be with everybody, especially those who have occupied our territory. So there's so much utter confusion that has been created by this soft approach, which is, in fact, my opinion, is not good for the Indian national interests. We have been in all our language with the Chinese. We have been having meetings after meetings, and then after the meeting, the first thing they'll say is that we have expressed our concern. The army recently met, army generals of India met the army generals of China on late June, July this year, and they issued a statement only a few days ago on the 2nd of August. And what did they say? They didn't say that we gave them a warning. They said we expressed our concern to the Chinese that your jets are now flying over the LAC, not across the LAC, but they're flying along the LAC. And this is in a press release. And I'm sorry to say that even the media has not been able to get access to data. I don't know what the problem is. It is not been reporting the Chinese are aggressors. So before I hand it over to Cleo Paskal, I will make one last point. What should we do? So this whole issue is, should we go to war? In my opinion, of course, we have to go to war if this is the way the Chinese have behaved after 18 meetings of one-to-one with the Prime Minister and making all these speeches about how then the BRICS was set up, and we spoke about how close we are. The Chinese are exporting to India 18 times what we export to them, and that is still continuing. A lot of the Chinese companies, etc., are still there. So, question is, we are facing loss of our territory. We are facing our loss of reputation because we are not able to take a stand, and therefore, should we recognize or create a climate opinion that we are headed for war and we better prepare for it on that basis. So what should we do? First, I would like to see the government of India, the Prime Minister, quit BRICS and SCO. You can't be in BRICS and Quad at the same time. And I don't see why it is Quad. It can be a 5-member, because Korea is also equally important in the area. They should also be included. And I don't know whether Vietnam, which is now quite anti-Chinese, would be ready also to do this. So I would like to see this take place. The second thing is, all exports and imports to China and back should be banned till the territory is recovered. And I don't think that we want the Americans to send their troops. And occasionally this routine, for decades we have been having joint operations in the hills and in the ocean and so on with the Americans, but now the newspapers are playing as if something new has happened. There's been no strategic dialogue of any significance so far with the United States. But I think we don't need United States troops to fight the Chinese. What we need is United States weapons. And if in the Quad it can be determined that to fight China, India should be supported, I would like to see that support come only at the level of weaponry. And of course, you can have personnel come in to check that the weaponry is arrived on time. And then I think the time has also come to make it clear to China that if you can violate an agreement and capture a territory, we are also in a position to violate some agreements with you. For example, we have an agreement on Tibet. We have said that Tibet is part of China. Now, why we should be saying that when you don't accept our territory as part of our country, and you are laying claims, and you're doing it clandestinely. So this is one. Second, why should I now say, not say, that the People's Republic of China has become a rogue country, and therefore the Chinese people should be recognized as those in Taiwan, and that Taiwan could be recalled as the Republic of China. I'm not saying we must do that, because that means breaking our policy. But we have to point it to the Chinese and tell them that you are breaking every agreement. You have come and occupied our land. And therefore, why should we now have this burden of defending your accession of or your conquest of Tibet, and that the frequent threat to Taiwan, which is actually the Republic of China, and it's a democratic country. They hold elections regularly, and they believe in human rights. And they, in terms of production, they are no. I mean, they are much superior to China. In fact, most of China's early economic development, take for instance Lenovo. Lenovo's all the circuits and everything came to China, and China only put the keyboard and the screen, and then put Lenovo made in China and exported to the West. So this is a country just like Israel. It's a small country but has enormous capacity in technology, the same way Taiwan is like that. And I think we should consider all options and put it to the Chinese. I'm not saying we should act on it, but I should certainly like it to be put to the Chinese and told that if you don't clear out, we will implement these 5 steps. Over to you, Cleo. We're all here to listen to you.
I'm not sure about that. Thank you, Dr. Swamy. It's a huge pleasure and honor to be on the show and to learn from you as I have been for many years, and your great team. You've summarized it better than I possibly could. Extremely helpful start. I guess the only thing maybe to add is that China has been at war with India kinetically, obviously, since 62, since they got rid of the buffer state, right? Since, there used to not be the problem because there wasn't a border. As soon as there was a border, then there was a problem. And of course, Mao had his whole, the palm of Tibet, and then the 5 finger strategy of Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, AP, and Ladakh, right? To grab over the top. So it won't stop. It won't stop until that is the strategic vision that they think is the imperative. So they'll buy time until they're in a position to be able to do it. But on the political warfare front, China has been at war with India for a very long time because India is an existential threat to China. It is everything China isn't. It's a country of 1 billion people. That's a democracy, which the Chinese Communist Party says is not possible. It's pluralistic, which China says is not possible, as it throws its people in concentration camps. It's dynamic and debative and all sorts of things that China says is impossible. So the mere existence of India as another model for humanity is a direct threat to China. In the same way that an independent Taiwan shows that ethnic Chinese people are fine with democracy, and in fact do better economically, as you've shown, if they're given their freedoms. The political warfare fight that China has been launching against India after Galwan. Galwan showed them that the Indians can really fight, and they will. And so then you started seeing all these political warfare attacks. You saw the attack on the Mumbai electrical grid. You saw the attack on the iPhone parts manufacturing plant. The Maoists were whipped up again. The social media activity to try to create division within the country. Everything to try to weaken India from the inside. And this is one area where I'd like to make very clear. India has fought back on the political warfare front like no other country has. Extremely effectively. The banning of WeChat and TikTok and the rolling up of the spy rings, and especially the work that you've done and your colleagues have done around corruption, when the Chinese can come in through those corrupt players, they can destroy the body politic. So the fight against corruption is a fight against Chinese political warfare, along with many other things. And this message that India has been showing, that you can fight back on the political warfare front, is incredibly important, not just for India, but for its neighbors. Look what happened with the Maldives. India saved the Maldives. India's trying to save Sri Lanka. I look a lot at the Pacific Islands. China has incredible grip over the Solomon Islands that today, or just these days, they're commemorating the start of the Battle of Guadalcanal. Carolyn Kennedy is there. There's a whole big thing. There were all of these diplomatic delegations when China started holding on to, when they signed their security deal with the Solomon Islands. The Americans went, the Japanese went. The one high commissioner they tried to keep out of the country was the Indian high commissioner. Because they knew if the Indians decided to make friends with the Solomons, they had the political warfare weaponry, the things to help with their society and their economy that could really cause a problem for China. It's a whole other way for a society and an economy to thrive and be secure and prosper. So the war is on. It's on kinetically. It's on politically. India has fought back on the political warfare front like nobody else has. It's helped not only India, but India's neighbors, and has been a model for what other countries aspire to. Countries in the Pacific want more India. And on the kinetic warfare front, that's something definitely that's not something anybody who isn't an Indian can discuss, because that's the lives of Indians. Nobody can decide that except Indians. I would hope that the West, or the free world, I'd prefer that term, because I think the Japanese would probably help also, would support India in as many different ways as they possibly could, whether it's intelligence or what you said about the economic thing is critical. The Chinese economy is hugely vulnerable. If the U.S., better than send troops, cut the Chinese off from the dollar. That would start to really hurt them. Similarly, start publishing everything we know about the families of the Chinese leaders. Where does Xi Jinping's daughter go to university? Does it happen to be, your alma mater, for example? Where's their money hiding? Where's that? Really show that these people are hit their legitimacy. So there's a lot that can be done on the political warfare front that could really damage them as well. And I would just like to thank you for all that you've done to keep, and I know it's a team effort, but I also know that being the tip of the spear is never easy.
Yes.
So thank you for that. And also India as a whole for showing that we can fight China on the political warfare front. And we really have to.
Yeah. Well, that's a very succinct presentation of on the subject. Let me ask you a few questions, maybe a couple of them before my colleagues start asking you. And we also get from the audience, we get sometimes questions. We'll pass it on to you. See, let's look at the Indo-US cooperation. There is in the United States some people who don't like the politics of the BJP, saying that you are hurting human rights and so on and so forth. So first question is, do you think that will be a factor in helping India in case we get into a major conflict with on the ground, military conflict with China? Second is, Indonesia is on one side of the Malacca Strait and India is on the other side in Car Nicobar. If Indonesia and India decide to monitor the traffic in that small area between on the either side, on which either side Indonesia and India are, China will not be able to do any foreign trade with any country. we can blockade them. And if in addition we can draw in the Vietnamese and the Singaporeans, then I think dealing with China on the ocean is going to be no difficulty. So my third question would be, and I would like to see whether the Americans would consider supporting such a move, that the Indonesians and the Indians get together and start monitoring, like the Suez Canal, you start monitoring the Malacca Strait, where 90% of the Chinese foreign trade goes through ships. Now, the whole question is, as an Indian, I'm not speaking on behalf of the government, even though I'm part of the ruling party. I would say the thing that the Indians would like, of course, are your modern weapons. In the small weapons, I think the Israelis have done a complete job. We don't need, a repeater rifle and things like that. The Israelis have done a fantastic job of selling us those things at a reasonable price. But in the question of cyber warfare, in the question of satellite imaging, and in the question of your Seventh Fleet role, how far do you think the Americans would go, or likely to go, given the political constraints, whichever they are, in our fight with China? Would you like to see it? And the Indians don't want your troops, so you don't have a Afghanistan or a Vietnam problem. We have enough troops, but the question is to empower our troops with the most modern weapons, and our people will catch up, learn these things very fast. We can't be dependent on S-400, which in fact the Russians have not even fully delivered, because they diverted some of it to China, and because the Chinese demanded it in advance, so they skipped our position in the queue and gave it to the Chinese. So that's these are some of the questions I want to ask before I go to my colleagues.
Thank you. So the Indonesia question is really interesting, and I think it gets to this sort of this was a discussion that we had a while ago about, at the beginning of the Second World War, the Americans and the British got together and wrote this Atlantic Charter for their vision for, what they wanted the world to be like afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's high time, I think, for an Indo-Pacific charter led by the countries of the Indo-Pacific, with obviously India as a lead on that, about what the countries of the region want. So in the context of sort of India, Indonesia, if you build it between, there's so many linkages, historical, cultural, geographic linkages, you don't need others. And if it's fighting to protect all of the things that the free world says it wants, freedom of seas, democracies, all that stuff, others have to join, right? So you don't have to wait for others to lead on that. And in fact, it would have more legitimacy if it comes of the region. On the U.S. helping, so of course, as you know, I'm a Canadian, so all I can do is apologize for what my country has not done and should have done on many files related to India. I do have the privilege. I do do some lectures at U.S. Military seminars, and I can tell you the rank and file in the U.S. absolutely understands India's position and would like to support it. It's not a Department of Defense issue. It's a political issue, and there is an enormous amount of that Sino-Wahhabi money that goes into the U.S. political system. Yeah, to try to create the sort of image that you're talking about of India. And I'll be on panels, and out of nowhere, somebody who says they're a human rights person from in one case, it was sort of a European who's working on North Korea will say, well, what about these, Hindu nationalists in India and blah, blah, blah. And so what do? You go, first of all, what's wrong with being Hindu and what's wrong with being nationalist? So let's start with the way that you're framing it initially. But that's how they try to derail the conversation. And there is a lot of money that goes into academia and goes into the media to try to, and obviously goes in through lobbying firms to try to create that. Because if you truly care about what China is doing to your country, no matter what your country is, you need India as strong as possible. This was something that I did an interview with a young Korean American called Si-Hoon Kim, who said, on the university campuses, what you feel rising is rising anti-Semitism and rising Hinduism. And the push is coming to a large degree from the Sino-Wahhabi type lobby stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not intrinsic to the political system. And if you get politicians who truly care about China, and you're seeing interesting thing happening around the midterm, right? People who want the U.S. to be to stand up to China, to defend its economy, to do all of the things that you're talking about India doing, they know they need India as an ally, and they need a strong India as an ally. So it's a byproduct of this political warfare. The U.S. has not managed to ban TikTok or WeChat. When India did it, the Trump administration tried to do it, and a WeChat users group sprung up out of nowhere. This is the lawfare component, right? And sued to say it was a restriction of their First Amendment freedom of speech rights. And they dragged it through the court. The Biden administration came in and dropped the ban and paid the legal fees of the group that had sued them to do it. That's the difference between India and the U.S. currently on the political warfare battlefront. And that plays into the U.S.-India relationship very deliberately on the part of those who want to keep U.S. and India apart.
Yeah. One very, very short question. We don't want the United States to be involved beyond supplying weapons. And so the question of United States involvement as it happened in other countries, where your concern for human rights and all these things are matters which were relevant for your congressional bodies to pick it up. As far as India is concerned, fighting China and bringing it, to a defeat is a huge contribution to not only global but even American national interests. And in that, the only thing that the Indians would require, according to my understanding, I've been for several years member of the Defense Committee. I've been to every nook and corner. I also follow it. So I think the Americans couldn't get a better opportunity to fight with China than an India-China fight, and the Americans only supplying weapons. So in that sense, you think that the Sino-Wahhabi, which I fully agree with you, I know all of them. Some of them infiltrated in Harvard and made a lot of trouble for me. So I know that, but the fact is that the American establishment could easily work independently of their influence on a matter like a war with China for India. So just my comment. And now I'll go over to my colleagues and Jagdish, who's Ramesh. Ramesh is a scientist based in New Jersey, but he's as Indian as they come. So he keeps very close touch with the Indian developments. Professor Arvind Chaturvedi has been teaching in business schools, and he's a scholar. And of course, Jagdish Shetty is based in Bombay, and he really manages our political network very efficiently. So all three of them are very talented people, and they're going to ask you questions. So over to any three of you.
Okay, I'll take the first one. Cleo, you'd written sometime in March about China's move to dominate the Pacific, and the U.S. When the U.S. is mired in Ukraine, they're taking the Polynesian Islands, Solomon Islands. You'd written about is China taking away too many problems, like the Polynesian Islands issue, the Taiwan issue, the India issue? Are they taking way too many problems, and are they capable to handle all of these when they erupt together? So that's the question that I have.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. So I see the Pacific Islands and the India issue from a Chinese perspective is linked. So if China is going to expand on the land front, the biggest problem is India. It needs India either neutral or off the board in order for it to be able to move in terms of land. And in fact, Dr. Swamy, I'd be this SCO question. I don't really understand the SCO, but this is a question maybe for later. Is the relationship between India and Central Asia? Can India offer a different alternative or bolster Central Asia? So I wonder if being in SCO, I wonder if I just don't know whether it's so corrupt at this point. There's no point being there, or whether it's at least an opportunity to meet some of the Central Asian states. The Pacific Islands, if you're standing on the coast of China, you look out, you see the first island chain, you see Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines. You can't move that huge fleet that Dr. Swamy was talking about, including the subs and the more secret, off the coast unless you break the chain, which is why they need Taiwan. But if you're going to take it, you have to take the whole circle around it, so you have a security perimeter, and those are the Pacific Islands. So India is necessary on the land side and also the Indian Ocean, obviously, but it's right up there. And the Pacific Islands are necessary for the maritime expansion. So neither of them are luxuries. They are essential if China is going to achieve what it wants to achieve in terms of domination, which is overtly what it says it wants.
Just to follow up, from a Chinese aggression perspective, China has not been in a war, quote unquote, in modern times. So do they have? I mean, they have a lot of they have the hardware. They claim to have all the technology, whatnot, and all those things, but they have not put that hardware to use, in the sense that they've not had a war to really test them. Leave the equipment alone. The people, does the army, the people, do the armed forces have the experience and the mindset to engage in a war? What is your thought on that?
Yeah, so the Chinese mindset is the political warfare to kinetic warfare is along a continuum, and they're going to use whatever works. And the more that they have at that the kinetic side, they feel that the further they can get on the political warfare side, because people are scared of them anyway. But you saw with Galwan, if they tried kinetically, the Indians surprised them and pushed them back. But otherwise, they would keep pushing, and they can push in the Himalayas because they have that huge military infrastructure behind them. And in places like the Philippines, they're scared of them. When they show up, they have the PLA, official PLA Navy, but they also have the maritime militia and the fishing fleet, which are militarized and all that stuff. If you have a very big stick and people know you're willing to use it, you may be less likely to use the stick initially, but when you're ready to use the stick, you'll use the stick. The problem is that the U.S. policy has always, or has been, speak softly and carry a big stick. If people don't think you're ready to use the stick, people aren't, they're not going to behave accordingly. And now the question is the U.S. going to be willing to use the big stick? And so then the other one, who shows his stick is getting a lot bigger, has an advantage on it. And I would argue things like the way that they flooded the U.S. with fentanyl, which is essentially chemical warfare. It's designed to destroy societies, destroy communities. The same thing they've done to the economy. And the way that COVID, regardless of where COVID came from, they blocked flights out of Wuhan and they allowed flights internationally. That's consistent with China's policy of being number one in the world in terms of comprehensive national power. That's the goal. It's in the think tanks. That's the language. The goal is China's number one in the world in terms of comprehensive national power. You can do that in two ways. One, you compete and get better. The other, you knock everybody else down, right? And so if you have a virus that's affecting your economy and your population, and you know it's going to knock you down, it's logical for you to allow it to spread so everybody else gets knocked down more, and at the same time you hoard PPE and you do all sorts of other stuff as well. So when we talk about warfare, we tend to talk about these very, picking up a gun and shooting somebody. But these other warfares, the chemical warfare, the biological warfare, have shown that China is willing to do things that the Chinese Communist Party is willing to do things that no civilized country would. So I don't, and those are the weapons of choice for those two, but they have those other kinetic weapons, and I think they would be willing to use them in ways that we possibly couldn't imagine.
Thank you, Cleo.
Okay.
Arvind?
Yeah, my question to both Dr. Swamy and Cleo Paskal. There are several questions. I'll try to summarize them into one question with several parts. First of all, India and China have had a strained relationship on surface, but actually both of them have been have had increased trade in the past few years, which shows that in Indian politics, the right hand doesn't know what left hand is doing. China gets irritated even when Prime Minister Modi greets Dalai Lama on his birthday. China tries to befriend Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and tries to create irritable situation for India. Very recently, China had decided to send a vessel to Hambantota port in Sri Lanka that is named Space and Satellite Research Vessel, or some such name that was given. But India objected to it, and they withdrew. In fact, it was to come in the third week of August. So maybe China has postponed it for some time.
No, China didn't. No, wait 1 minute. China didn't withdraw. The Sri Lankans told them that please don't come.
Sri Lanka also objected. Now, Gotabaya Rajapakse had actually invited them, and now the Ranil Wickremesinghe is now objecting to it. So is it this erratic situation, irritable situation which China is creating for India is pinpricks? Actually, is not really ready for a state of a war, but trying to create situation where India also gets disturbed. So do you think this kind of symptoms which we observe are also going to add to the tension between the two countries?
Dr. Swamy?
No, you're the guest, so you go first.
Okay. Thank you. That ship is really interesting, the Wanwang 5. It's a massive spy ship, and it was just in the waters of Palau. And the government of Palau was really unhappy with it, but didn't have the capability to say no. And this is where, India is showing this, first of all, this is a bad ship. We don't want this anywhere near us. And saying it publicly helps other countries like Palau say, yeah, that's why we don't want it. But also, as India gets involved and starts to create this space, the security space around it, it gives a model for others to try to replicate. And if in the context of the Quad, for example, the Quad was involved with the Pacific Island countries, it could help them defend their waters from things like like these ships. And this pinprick thing that you're talking about, it's very relevant because there is this other Mao policy of taking the countryside to surround the cities and then take the cities. And in fact, I think that the actual analogy was sort of to take the fish and then so you can take the island. And so the idea of this sort of warfare is you slowly take this the easier to take area that's around it, and then suddenly the city realizes it's cut off and it can't operate anymore. So if they can take Sri Lanka, if they can take the Maldives, if they can and the countries that they can't take, if they can create a state of entropy, chaos, disintegration, fragmentation, so that they're weak, so weak that the Chinese can come in and use their influence operations to take control, like they tried to do in Nepal, like they've tried to do in the Solomons, then you are effectively surrounded. Your operations. So they might seem like little things all around, but you have to do what India is doing. You have to fight all of them and push out from the island to keep the seas secure in the Maoist analogy. Because otherwise, when you do try to act, you may end up with the problem. And on Afghanistan, just a quick question. I don't know whether you do you know what? Does anybody know what happened to Bagram Air Base? Who's at Bagram now?
The Pakistanis are definitely there.
Yeah, that was Afghanistan. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was heartbreaking and horrific on so many different fronts. And yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. For the people of Afghanistan, first and foremost, but also for what it's done to India and for the security of the region. And that was, understanding how that policy decision was made in the U.S. would be very helpful for understanding where lines of influence are, I think.
Let me answer your question very briefly, Arvind, by saying something which needs to be said. Vietnam defeated China in 1979. In fact, I have read secret reports on that, and the Vietnamese fought. Of course, the Vietnamese were in practice. They had just sent out the Americans, and the Chinese, after the Great Revolution, Cultural Revolution, and so on, they were in a mess. 1979 was almost just after Mao Zedong went and Deng Xiaoping had taken over, and it was a fiasco. In India, after 1962, in 67, in the Sikkim border, there's a Nathula Pass there. And the Chinese moved in to see if from Sikkim, if you come down, then you come to a thin strip where Bangladesh is below, and Assam is on this side, and Bengal is on this side. So if that thin strip is cut near Bhutan, then Assam is completely, out of reach for India on the land. So the Chinese have been trying very hard, and the Bhutanese, to their credit, have been to the extent that they can. But we Indians were not very proactive in it, so the Bhutanese also got a little disheartened. But we have to ensure, but in 1967, the Chinese troops came along, and the Indian army sent tanks on the mountain road, really courageous soldiers, and they thrashed the Chinese and pushed them away. Our government at that time decided not to publicize it because they said they didn't want to upset the Chinese. So this is something which you can see where there's a combat between India and China. The Chinese have lost. And second incident was 1987, 20 years later, when Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister. It's a place called Sumdurung Chu Valley. Chu means valley, actually, I think, in Arunachal. And the Chinese troops crossed that with all their artillery, everything, and the Indians met them not on the plains, but they went up and defeated them and made them go back. Again, it was not publicized. I myself asked Rajiv Gandhi, was a good friend of mine, why didn't you publicize it? He said, no, they are very touchy people. I don't want a big war. I don't know whether Mr. Modi is in the same thing, but Modi is hurting himself, in my opinion, by not clearly saying China is an aggressor. In fact, he went to the extent of saying nobody has come and nobody has gone. And his statement in Hindi is now widely publicized in India, people making jokes of it. So, coming back to it, I would say that the democratic world should actually encourage India to fight China and give them a defeat. And for that, whatever we can do to support India, the democratic world should come forward and say, we'll take care of the rest, we'll help you in the economy, we'll help you on the electronics, we'll help you on intelligence, all that. But go fight them and defeat them and send them packing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Madam, I have a question for you. How does the Western world see last 2 years our government, I would say, dilly-dallying on what's happening on the border? I'm asking for your view because you being in the West and you being in doing a lot of research on the being an expert, how does the Western world see for the last 2 years whatever is happening on the Indo-China border, and India not really calling them as aggressors? How does the Western world see it from their perspective or from the newspaper world? How do you all see this last 2 years or 2 years and 2 months or so, whatever is happening on our border? How do you see that, or how does the Western world see that?
So, if I want to see coverage about India and China, I have to go to the Indian media because it's very, very little covered in the Western media.
Yeah.
And what coverage there is tends to be through the lens of whatever that media's existing attitude towards China is. So if their existing attitude is, if we just talk to China, everything will be fine, then they present the talks as a good thing. If their concerns are, what's the point of talking to China? They're just buying time while they get stronger and try to attack you somewhere else. Then they say, what's the point of talking to China? They're just going to attack you somewhere else. But I'd say by and large, and this is just incredible to me. India is largely invisible in the Western press. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. There's a comfort in thinking there are only two worlds. There's the China sphere and there's the US sphere. If you start looking at the Indian sphere, then that's a whole other thing. The way that India has handled a whole different range of crises, like COVID, for example. If you want to talk about how the different US states handled COVID, but then you talk about how India handled COVID, that complicates the way you present the discussion. It's not the Chinese 100% lockdown, and it's not the route that the US took. So bringing India into the conversation is because India is complicated, makes it more complicated, and so it's easier just to kind of ignore it and look at India as a byproduct of pre-existing positions on other themes. So I'd say that generally there is a real lack of awareness of what you're talking about about the discussions on the borders. It's maybe a lot. If there's this long article about Chinese expansion, there might be one line about India and this border on there, and that line will be a byproduct of these pre-existing positions. Now, that's not the case in places like a Vietnam or a Japan or countries in the region that are watching it very closely and who are dealing with similar things. But in terms of the U.S. and Canada, I'd say yes. And that's why it's so easy for this Sino-Wahhabi lobby to pervert the message. And especially because there are people in the think tanks and academia and the media that are all trying to push India out of the mainstream conversation and create its own issues. And there was a time when India and Pakistan were hyphenated in the discussion. And then it became India-China hyphenated, and they're trying to push it back to India-Pakistan hyphenation. So it's, I wish that there was a subtlety in the discussion about it, but in the mainstream media, you very rarely see anything.
I just have a follow-up question. Okay, go ahead, Jagdishji.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
ma'am, I have another question. You have been a China watcher and you've been writing extensively on China. I want to know, I'm now deviating from the topic of Indo-China. I'm going back to China. Do you think there is a possibility of any type of rebellion or change of leadership or some type of dissent happening in the Chinese leadership in the next few years or few months? Do you see anything like this happening in China?
So on that, I would on that specific aspect, I would definitely defer to Dr. Swamy, who knows this much better than I do. All I would say is just for the framing of the question, because we get this a lot. The Chinese economy is collapsing, the demography is collapsing, and I've seen a few questions like that appear. For me, the issue is not, have we reached peak China, economically, demographically. The question is, have we reached peak Chinese Communist Party damage? Have we reached the peak of the damage that it can cause to the rest of the world? And whether the country gets stronger economically or weaker or demographically, I don't think they're anywhere near the peak of the damage they can cause to everybody else. And so we need to. That's what, from my perspective, that's what I'm worried about. Dr. Swamy?
Dr. Swamy, you would like to say on this anything internally happening in China, especially political leadership?
Listen, first of all, the Chinese economy prospered because Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Philippines, Singapore, they produced modern equipment, refrigerators, televisions, laptops, etc. But their labor began to get, these countries, their labor began to get expensive. So it's the Americans' bright idea to the Chinese in 1972 that you got a lot of hardworking labor. What we think is that the American conception was that we'd like to bring China in, but China is a lot smarter than they can't be easily being brought in and digested. But so they said, you get this semi-processed goods from East Asia and set up companies here jointly with the Americans, let the Americans alone do it, and so on. And then it's like, for instance, Apple, but so many of these refrigerators, everything, they have the basic parts, the basic parts of the refrigerator or the air conditioner, whatever, is produced in these East Asian countries. It is sent to China. China adds value added by putting, for example, in Lenovo, as I said, they put the digits for typing and the screen and the cover, and then of course they claim it is made in China, Lenovo, and sell it at a much higher price. So if you look at the Chinese trade with East Asia, they are negative. But if you look at it with Europe and America, it's a huge positive. So China accumulated enormous foreign exchange by this method. And India could have done it also, But the people I talked to, they said, you got all kinds of archaic laws. We have to go to court and sit there for 7 years. India is a mess. Here, of course, China being a communist country, we just walked in and the Chinese signed it, and everything, went smoothly. And the labor was cheap, and they were very hardworking. Chinese are very hardworking people. So the labor was cheap. So that was the economy. Now that's ended, because the Chinese urban centers have become very prosperous. Of course, now they're all facing problems. All these big buildings are all getting empty. The excess capacity in China in the urban sector is tremendous. And the agriculture prospered because people, the workers, the surplus workers all came to the city and got jobs, and all that's gone. So if you ask me whether China's economy will fall behind India, well, if Indian government learns economics, then we'll overtake them. At the moment, the Indian government has no concept of the way we have a supply problem or a demand problem, or what kind of problem we have. So it's, I'm just exasperated. So I don't talk about economics anymore, because it hurts all my training, my conscience and so on. I get very upset when India is loaded with cheap labor. India is loaded with the market. India is, so many things, but we don't even know that the problem with India is not supply but demand. So if it is demand, then please make it life easy for the people to spend. So lower the taxes, but they are going on raising the taxes, whether it's a petrol tax or not only income tax but every other. So India can overtake China without any difficulty. Especially now, because the Chinese have got, their model is over. Now they cannot produce the way they were producing earlier, and therefore they haven't got that kind of self-reliance system. So I would say that if there is a war and the Chinese lose, then I can't rule out that within the army there can be a coup, because there is a murmuring even today that Xi Jinping is going too far, that we are losing friends very fast. So the main thing is India should prepare for war. Don't worry about China. We have defeated them, as I told you, in Nathula. We defeated them in Sumdurung, and we defeated them in Galwan, which is pointed out very correctly. We actually defeated them in one of the, near the Pangong Lake, in one of the mountains. We climbed it and we occupied it. And then suddenly, in a fit of generosity, we returned it to them without any quid pro quo. So I think India needs a mindset that we have to get back our territory, no matter what the cost is. And I'll tell you, the Indians will back it fully. Like in 1962, Nehru collapsed, but the people didn't collapse. They came out in huge numbers and put money in buckets and so on, so that the defense expenditure could be met. So that's the key thing. Indian mind is much tougher than, we may look very disorganized and so on, but see the emergency, kept quiet throughout. When the elections came, which part defeated Mrs. Gandhi? The most illiterate part of India, the northern states. They wiped her out. The educated southern states voted for Mrs. Gandhi. So these are the potentials. We should recognize it. But I think we have now got a mission, that we have had enough of this Chinese behavior with us, and they support our enemies, and we are not complaining about it. They are the biggest supporters of Pakistan, and they are supporters of Burma. They nearly took away Sri Lanka, but fortunately Despite whatever people may say, it was Rajapaksa who ultimately brought it to a management level, and he pleaded with India, give me the money for Humantota. I will send the Chinese home. But here our bureaucrats started strutting around in Sri Lanka and made a complete mess of it. So I think the problem is not the Chinese, the problem is India. We have to develop a new mindset to be able to defend our own country.
Dr. Swamy, just as a follow-up, quick, we're just over time limit, but anyway, because I'm just taking some questions from the
By God, you're a very popular lady, madam. Yeah.
So the thing, Dr. Swamy, in the event of the war, what is preventing India from getting aggressive? One, is it because they're afraid of an unrest, supply chain issues? Is this also a global pressure? So between Cleo and Dr. Swamy, you can answer this. But I'm just succinctly putting, because there are 5 questions, I'm just putting all of them into one.
I'll tell you the real reason after this program is over.
Dr. Swamy, I have a question.
I have verified the reason.
Cleo.
I still have friends in China too. They were my students at Harvard, and they are still very sad that I've been driven to this position, so to speak. They're being sympathetic, but I can tell you that we have no real reason not to fight, and there's no reason to say that nobody has come. That itself is a giveaway. And so there are reasons which, in my opinion, which will come out one day.
Okay.
But at the moment, I can't on television tell you.
Okay. Cleo, your point, I mean, is a lack of India's aggression, is it more, is there any international pressure on India not to be aggressive in your perspective?
No, maybe from the Russians, but they are junior partners of China. I won't get... the smaller countries, they would be very happy if we cut China to size. And I'm sure the United States definitely, because otherwise they wouldn't have formed the Quad.
Yeah, and I would frame it more as defensive as opposed to aggressive. So, India's been on the receiving end of the psychological warfare. So under this Chinese unrestricted warfare doctrine, there are 24 different warfares, but the 3 most important warfares are psychological, media, and lawfare. And they're using all of them against India to try to make India, and against everybody else, but to make India not respond. So this issue of the regulations and things slowing down the Indian economy, that benefits China enormously. So you might see lobby groups that want to get more environmental regulations, for example, in place. They'll fund environmental groups. There are legitimate environmental concerns. They'll find legitimate things, latch onto those, and then ride them to a conclusion that benefits China. The media stuff, creating social media discontent. You saw it around things like the farmers' protest, where stuff was coming in from the outside that was designed to create division within Indian society, to paralyze it, to create this entropic zone, to force it inwards. But also this psychological component that China is too big. You can't beat China. They've got all this money. India's broke. India's weak. India's divided. All that stuff. That's psychological warfare. If you're repeating that, you are doing the work of the Chinese Communist Party.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah,
well
so,
said.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. So getting the China, before you say something, think: does this benefit China or does this benefit India or whoever else you're representing? And also, even just the word aggressive versus defensive. India didn't start this fight.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, India needs to defend against the fight. That's like the Taiwan thing. That there's no reunification there. That's an invasion. And when you look at China's One China policy, which includes parts of India, that's an invasion plan. They're telling you the list of locations and countries they want to invade. So taking control of the language helps you take control of your mental space. And as Dr. Swamy said, that's the primary battle space right now. China has been trying to get into your head, get into all of our heads, and paralyze us so we don't act. And the first thing you have to do is clear out your head and figure out what is good for you and your family and your community and country, and then build off of that.
And the last question is about why is Taiwan not recognized, quote unquote, as a country by India? Your thoughts, Cleo. And should India? I know what Dr. Swamy is going to say, so we all know this group, and a lot of us know. But your thought process on it.
I really can't speak for India. I mean, the one thing I've learned about dealing with or learning from working with India is, Indian strategists from the Arthashastra forward are much smarter than I am. So if there's a decision that's being made, there might be very good reasons for it that I couldn't possibly understand. So I can't say why, but I would like to very quickly go back to the economic thing, because that's China's big vulnerability. And as Dr. Swamy was saying, that's India's great strength. India not only has a young, educated, English-capable population, but there is rule of law, all the things that you need for an economy to grow. The Chinese economic model is fundamentally parasitic. It goes into other countries. It sucks out intellectual property. It sucks out capital. So it brings it back. So China can only grow as long as it's parasitically depleting other economies. So getting China out of your economy is essential for you to be able to grow as a country. I mean, you can't completely do it, or maybe you can. And if there's war, we're going to find out. But engaging with China economically is almost never, I can't think of a single case where it's beneficial to the host country because of this parasitic component to it.
Leo, last question.
Okay, just one interruption.
Go ahead, Dr. Swamy.
Name one big country which has recognized Taiwan. Why you're singling out India?
It's morely because of where we are today, Dr. Swamy, as far as our
therefore, what you're saying is that unlike even the United States has not recognized Taiwan. Look at the hullabaloo over that Nancy Pelosi. And she was determined to go. Therefore, ultimately, they had to adjust. But I don't think that there is any country that I know which has recognized Taiwan.
So I see some of the ones that do, those little Pacific islands, for example, Palau does, and they're small. But the reason they do it is interesting. So sometimes it's discounted as financial, but actually the Chinese would give them a lot more money to switch to China. And the reason that they stick with Taiwan is actually moral and values based. Because they believe in all of the things that we all say we believe in, but don't seem to be willing to put our policy where our mouth is in some cases.
Yeah.
On the economic front, is the U.S. CHIPS bill, has it got any impact? Could India or anybody benefit? Or how do you see that play out politically?
So as long as the investment doesn't go back into companies investing in China, we're okay. I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out, but ideally everybody except authoritarian countries that suppress their own populations and are aggressive with their neighbors will benefit. But the devil is in the detail.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Swamy, I have a brief question. You said we must take up with the China, whatever be the cost. Now, what do you think is likely to be the cost of a war? And how long do you think India will take to recover from the cost of the war? 2 years, 3 years? From 2016 onwards.
No. See, the thing is, first of all, if India says all the territory which China has taken, and as a punishment, if you want to add, that we now scrap the 1996 agreement, even Aksai Chin and all these we are going to take back. I think Indian economy will start growing. The demand factor from the war is going to be huge for the Indian economy. That's what we are lacking today. Indian problem is nothing more than the fact that the demand has come down. If you go to an automobile shop, you will see cars, unbought cars, lying all over their ground space. People are not able to get a good price. Good sales amount like before. So you have to put purchasing power into people's hands. And a war will do that. It did it for many countries. It did for the United States. It did for Germany. I'm of course not giving that as an example, because the guy who benefited was Hitler. But the fact is that that's exactly what happened after World War I and the Great Depression. They didn't know how to come up. It was a war which gave the demand factor. So
But
don't worry about the war. Just print notes.
That will also put a stop to Indo-Chinese trade. So do you think India can afford to stop that?
Indian trade is all negative for us. We are importing.
Yes.
They are, and they are hardly, importing anything from India. Maybe they get
many products we are dependent on China.
Kudremukh mountain in Karnataka has the world's best iron ore, and is being smuggled to China through Visakhapatnam and Calcutta. I met people in China who I asked them what do they come for. They said, "Oh, we come to." I said, "But Kudremukh iron ore is not be." There used to be Reddy brothers. They were doing that, and of course they were paying the politicians also, so they kept quiet. But the Kudremukh thing has been gouged and gouged and gouged. It could have given us the best steel in the world if we had put the steel plants. So, all these are there, but in a war, people become one. They have demonstrated in 1962, they have demonstrated in 1971, they demonstrated in 1999. When a war comes, everybody becomes disciplined in India.
Okay.
I'm not advocating a war for that purpose, but I'm saying don't raise these fearsome issues, because a war is going to solve those problems.
Arvind,
I think we have overdone it. Poor lady, she might sue us one of these days.
We have already crossed 80 minutes almost, and from our recently adopted norm, we should wind up the program within 60 minutes or maybe 45 minutes, because of the topicality of the subject. Cleo Paskal is so popular, as Dr. Swamy said, and the questions are pouring in from the viewers.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid we have to stop. Maybe some other time we'll discuss this. In last few months, we have discussed China several times, and it is an issue which never dies, especially the war issue. Only 2-3 weeks back, we had discussed how to stop whether India should go with China for a war. And these issues are very important. But surprisingly, the government is not provoked. The media is discussing this. Opposition politicians are discussing this, but government is not reacting. There is no reaction from the BJP government about the acceptance of the views that different people are dishing out. Anyway, thanks, Dr. Swamy, for starting this discussion, which is a very important topic and very popular topic with public also. And thanks, Ms. Cleo Paskal, for spending time with us. I think it is the second program that you are having with us in last 2 years. And maybe we'll also invite you once again on this Indo-China issue, or maybe any other issue, because people are interested in listening to your views also. Thanks, my co-host Jagdish Shetty and Ramesh Swamy. I also thank the technical team led by Ashish Shetty, Ishwar Iyer, Gadgi Rakesh, Swaminathan, Tejas, Navalgul, Vishal Mehta, and Najesh Nair, without whose support this program is not possible. and the popularity of this program is growing weeks over weeks. And as Jagdish Shetty has said in the beginning, only 2 weeks back we had a program on parliamentary and procedures, and more than 1.5 lakhs viewers have already seen that program. So the popularity of this program, 166 episode, will continue like this. Next Sunday again we'll meet at 8 p.m. in 167th episode with Dr. Swamy, new topic and perhaps a new guest. Thank you all. Viewers, we'll be meeting next Sunday. Till then, namaskar, Jai Hind.
Jai Hind. Dhanyavad.